Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, darling, had fun. This thing to work. Yep. We're live. You got to pull the mic to you, dude.
Sorry, this is my first time doing it.
Be a podcaster. All right, we got Collin Johns here. We were just talking about which podcasts he wouldn't go on.
I mean, it's probably a pretty short list.
Yeah.
I'm pretty open to going on podcasts.
Yeah.
He's even going to go on Greg Dow's podcast, which didn't even know Greg Dow had a podcast.
Well, he asked me this past week, and I mean, I like Greg.
Greg's a goat.
Would you ever start your own podcast?
I don't feel the need to really start my own podcast. Not a big interest of mine. I have other things that I'd be more interested in pursuing.
Got it.
Like what?
Yeah.
Like what? Well, you and I are co-founders in the business, my pickleball coach / my pickleball journey. So we're excited to go on the meeting later and discuss all the important things that are happening.
Yeah. So when did you get involved with my pickleball coach? Like,
that's a good question. Actually, it was last year that Martina Coakley called me and she told me what was going on. She had this opportunity with a golf platform that wanted to expand. They had already expanded to soccer, and they were having success with that. So she's like, let's do a pickleball one. And you're kind of the guy that I want to go to write the back end stuff. And I feel like you're the most qualified person to do that. And
she told me the same thing.
I know, right? It's the same story for everybody. Went to Jordan Briones after that, Johnson Cola, same story.
Bunch of chumps.
But after we talked and we kind of discussed, and I met Rick, who was one of the other co-founders, I decided it was something that I wanted to do. So definitely helped a lot in those first few months, and now it's taken off, it's launched. So we're excited about expanding it now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been pretty cool so far. I've actually had a bunch of clients. I don't know how many films you've reviewed so far, but for those who don't know what we're talking about, which is probably 99.9% of you, including Thomas.
Including me. What's going on?
Basically, we co-founded an app called
For sure. Yeah. And we've just been learning on the go, and definitely they have the golf platform that does really well. So it's nice to not start from scratch. So I think that's really valuable. But to answer your question, I haven't done any reviews. I've been slacking on that, and I still need to train my assistants, because once we get to a critical mass, we're not going to be able to review hundreds of match film or all these clients sending stuff back. So to make it scalable, you have assistants. So just to be clear, you're not able to send me match film and just guaranteed that Collin Johns will review it right away.
Fair enough. Thomas, we can help you get your duper up for sure.
I'm bored of this conversation.
Well, why don't you just read your Swimply ad then?
Yeah.
I don't have a Swimply ad today.
Wow. Okay.
But if I can steer the conversation before you do, I want to talk paddles. Okay. And I want to get Collin's take on, and we can just talk about like paddlegate version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like just your general take on the issues with deflection, surface roughness, testing, the discrepancy between being able to play certain paddles in PPA, but not MLP and all that. I mean, generally, like how much of a difference do you think having a hot paddle makes, or having an overly gritty paddle? Like this paddle tech, how much of a factor is it in pickleball right now?
Yeah. How much time do we have? We could be here a very long time. Definitely, it's been a hot button topic for a while now. And the paddle does make a very big difference right now, where I feel like a few years ago, more or less all the paddles were the same. Most of them were fiberglass. Electrum was the first one to come out with that carbon fiber surface. And then everyone started to mimic that, and everything changed. And then the power went up as well. So having a really good paddle, to me, makes a difference in the sense that when you're counterpunching, if you can just get the paddle into position, if you have a flamethrower paddle, it's just going to hit the ball back so much harder. So we had the delaminated issue earlier this year, and it was making players that, no disrespect, that were 4-5-5-0 players hitting the ball harder than top pros, which I don't think is appropriate, and nor is it safe. There were a few times where I was playing against some battles where I was like, I don't even feel safe right now. I want to put on some protective goggles if that's how hard you can hit the ball. Because if you miss high, there's no way you can get out of the way. So that becomes a safety issue. Fortunately, we got the DLAM issue sorted out quite a bit. I feel like our testing procedures now, at least it's a big deterrent for people to use those sort of paddles. And honestly, it's pretty easy to tell when a paddle's delaminated.
Right.
Versus something like exit speed ratio or the deflection test that's much harder to measure. So I do feel like we need to go to a better test. The deflection test is not great. And the reason being, it can really vary quite a bit. And my brother did a podcast, I think, with you guys that got into the specifics, and he can talk way more technical than I can on that. But Major League Baseball uses an exit speed ratio and coefficient of restitution. So both of those tests are more accurate. And essentially, it's more pure, where it's like, all right, if we throw the ball into the paddle at a given speed, how hard does it come off the paddle? It doesn't matter how thin the paddle is, how thick, what surface, whatever. Here's what the limit is. And if it exceeds it, you're not allowed to use the paddle. So if we get to that test, and I've talked to Carl Schmitz a bit on that, they do want to move to that test. It's just going to be more expensive and it's going to be more time consuming. So once we get to that, I feel like we'll have to decide where do we want to set the limit, because obviously there's a limit right now in terms of deflection. But I think it would make more sense if we kind of got together as players and tours and said, hey, where should the limit be? Because you look at the points right now, and women's doubles is actually more entertaining to watch in many ways because you have more extended firefights. And what some people complain about right now is at the top level on the male side, the dink rallies last forever. And they're like, well, why is that? And the reason is when you're in a dink rally and you want to speed the ball up, there's a high level of risk. Because if somebody like Deckel gets on top of a counterpunch with a really hot paddle like he uses, the point is just over. Like, you will not be getting that back. Versus the ladies, they have a lot of power and they have powerful paddles, but they don't have as much. And their court positioning is not usually as far up towards the line, so they can usually get the next one back. And that's when you get those great extended firefights. Not that it doesn't happen on the male side, but it happens less, because the risk is so much more. So I feel like the points would start to be better again, or more like what they used to be if you lessened the deflection. So if everyone had less of a hot paddle, I think the risk of attacking would be lessened and more people would speed up the ball. And that's another component to it, the spin, where you can generate enough spin to get the ball below the level of net on a speed up on a relatively higher ball. Maybe it's still below the level of the net, but if you can dip it enough, then you can start these firefights, and then I feel like the points will be accelerated, and it could be more fun to watch. A lot of people talk about the long dink rallies and like, oh, I don't like it, or this or that. I would caution people to really think twice about that, because it is kind of nice to see the different styles of play. Maybe the women's game is faster and the guys' game is slower. You get to see the chess match, so to speak, on the dink rallies and moving the ball around and why we're putting it there. So there's definitely some thought you need to put into it, but the paddle technology, I feel, is a lot more important than people think. And it's really, there's a testament to that is how different the guys' game is played versus the ladies' game.
Hell of an answer. We were just talking about when you came on, when it was you, me, and Casey Patterson, and you and Casey just went off for like 20 minutes, and I just sat there without contributing a thing.
That was a good podcast interview for sure. Casey and I hit it off. I had never talked to Casey more than a couple minutes at a time before that.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of similarities. We could probably fire up the recast of that at some point. There were some good highlight clips. For
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I'm a fan of when you just kind of go into these rabbit holes. So
we could dive even deeper into that rabbit hole for sure.
Well, what's your understanding of the way that, so I think we all kind of know at this point how spin is attempted to be regulated, and it's regulated by surface roughness, right? Yes. So I think it's pretty well understood how that's done. Mm-hmm. The different standards across MLP, PPA, across paddles, but I don't even fully understand currently how deflection is being tested. I know there's basically the only thing, as I understand it, and let me know if you understand it differently, the only thing that's currently going on site at a PPA tournament is a basically ultrasound to see whether the face of the paddle is adhered to the core. and if there's separation, that paddle can be eliminated or disqualified.
Yes. So at PPA, they have more limited equipment. I think MLP has a bit more at their disposal. I think Brooks Wiley told me that they took, it was like 24, 28 paddles out of play at the last MLP event due to them being over the limit in some way. So that's interesting to me that if you have some higher level tech equipment, you can start to take other paddles out of play that would maybe pass to PPA. So longer term, I feel like we need a solution, and it might be as simple as, warning the paddle manufacturers that they can't exceed these limits or there will be harsh penalties. And then the problem may go away on its own. Sort of like the grit limit, where you saw the fiasco that happened last year, and essentially the penalties became a little bit more harsh and everyone was deterred from potentially going over the limit. So I know that the paddles that I get...
Not everyone.
Huh, what's that?
Nothing gone.
The paddles that I get from Yola, they test them beforehand to make sure that they're within that margin of error. Make sure that you want to get it as close to the limit as possible, obviously, for performance, but you don't want to go over the limit so you're not cheating the system. So that's something I feel like more companies are doing for the pro players. And obviously it makes a difference at the amateur levels as well. But as long as it's not way, way over, I don't feel like they're going to gain a huge advantage. The main thing you really have to take out of play is the outliers, where somebody can't be using a paddle that has 60, 70 grit when the limit's 40, because then essentially you're making that player have a big advantage over other people because they don't have that equipment. They're better simply because they have better equipment, which is defeating the whole purpose of having rules. And then you see some different loopholes that are coming in where it's an average of 6 directions when they measure the surface roughness test. And what some companies figured out is if we make one direction really smooth and one direction really rough, you're still going to get a lot more spin because one direction of the grooves matters a lot more than the other. So you have to close a loophole like that.
That company sounds real smart.
They sound real smart. I mean, there needs to be a rule put in place to where it can't exceed a certain number, because essentially it's just getting around the rules again. And obviously saying that you want to up the surface roughness is an entirely different conversation, but the intent of the rules is to make sure that people can't get around the system. So definitely it's a learning process, and pickleball is a very new sport, and it's something that every sport goes through, and Major League Baseball is still amending their rules with the different bats and deflections and what have you. So it's no surprise that pickleball is having these issues. It's not like there's a bunch of nefarious activity going on. Every sport goes through this, and it's just a matter of making sure you prioritize that everyone's playing under the same rules.
So how would you differentiate an innovation from skirting around the rules?
I think that you have to decide what we want the rules to really encompass, because maybe everyone wants the surface roughness to go up, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that'll make the points better. Or maybe everyone wants to raise the deflection, but that's a bad idea for safety reasons. So you have to really understand what is going to make this sport worth watching. So in college baseball,
I think you hit the nail on the head there. Yeah.
Yeah. And in college baseball, they had to take out aluminum bats because literally people were getting hurt, and they went to composite bats. So that's just a reason that they felt they had to change the rules. And I'm not saying that we should be quick to change the rules, but I think that everyone can more or less agree on what is innovation and what is skirting the rules. And it's something that a lot of people should weigh in on, and it's not a decision one or two people should make, but it's definitely something that keeps coming up, at least recently.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that we certainly need to have an overall objective, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to limit power? Do you want to limit spin? Right? Or whatever it is. Do you want to limit, there's an obvious one. Do you want to limit the dimensions of the paddle? That's easy to enforce, right?
Yeah.
But power and spin are obviously much more difficult to test in real time. I do think that it's tough because players are looking out for their own interests, right? Which is, look, somebody else has a better paddle than me. Like, I want that paddle gone. And so it's a little bit of the wolves and the sheep voting on what's for dinner.
Yes.
Right?
It is true. And I think a good point on that is you don't want to change the equipment so much that the players that have been playing a long time feel like they not wasted their time, but they practiced something that is now obsolete. So I had a really good conversation about
I'd say
this
that's accurate. Yeah.
with Collin Dawson recently. And I said to him, why do you think the original group of players in pickleball still win? And certainly some new players that come along, but most of the players that are top players right now have been playing an extended amount of time. Someone like Matt Wright, where he's older, he's not as athletic as some of the younger players that have come in, and he wouldn't argue that, but he still wins. And why is that? And Callan thought, well, when we came in, we didn't have these gritty, powerful paddles. We had to practice something like dinking for hours on end, and I feel like it gave us a skill set that a lot of players these days skip because you have better equipment. And they're like, well, why should I dink when I can just flip when I got this amazing, really powerful, really gritty paddle? And they don't end up practicing something like thinking as much as we did back in the day because we had no other option. So I thought that was a really interesting answer. And I think that changing the paddle technology would definitely make some skills more or less obsolete, which I would definitely caution against. Do we want pickleball to remain pickleball? We don't want it to become miniature tennis, where if you take an extreme case and you made the paddles twice as gritty and twice as powerful, singles for sure would become miniature tennis. And I don't think anybody wants that. Pickleball is what it is because it's pickleball. It's not other sports. There's definitely nuance to it, and it definitely doesn't make the players that have been putting in a lot of time for many years feel good when somebody can rock in a few months they can be one of the top players. That doesn't seem very appropriate. And certainly people put in a lot of hard work, and I'm not saying they don't, but it's something that I would say is important to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that just goes back to the overall objective as well, right? Like, what do we want our points to look like?
Yeah.
And you can adjust too. If speeding up has gotten so disincentivized by poppy paddles or whatever, you can then make an adjustment. I do think that, a lot of this happens so quickly, where baseball, there are these tiny innovations that are being made year in and year out that might have a 1% effect on somebody's play. However, pickleball, like, you can switch a paddle and potentially have a 30% increase in your play if you are using, that new gearbox paddle, for example, right? Like, even if that thing is completely legal by every testing protocol, I guarantee that paddle will be banned.
Yeah, I haven't played with that paddle enough or played against that paddle enough to say specifically. And Brandon had it this week, and it certainly seemed very hot to me. And yeah.
Sorry, what paddle was this?
It's the new gearbox paddle, and a few people are talking about it already. Seems to be really good paddle. And yeah, I think you're right, where essentially there would be a new set of rules put in place. They're like, we don't care that you got around all the rules that currently exist. That paddle is dangerous, or it's giving you too much of an advantage over the competition, because I don't think anyone's saying that we have the perfect set of rules yet. And I'm not singling out Gearbox by any stretch, and I'm not saying they're cheating the rules or anything like that.
I would bet a lot of money that Raphael is within every single published rule.
Yeah, and
because I think that guy's a very smart paddle manufacturer.
Absolutely, and he's done his research and development, and he's probably earned the fact that paddle passes. So that's not what we're saying. It's more that something can be created outside of what we want based on the current rules that exist. And we're going to have to tighten it up to where we're deciding that the paddle can only do this, where that's where I really like something like exit speed ratio, because it's more pure, and something like the gearbox paddle might be passing deflection, quote unquote, but the exit speed ratio is double what we want it to be. And it's making the points either a safety hazard or it's giving them too much of an advantage over the competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I actually think with better equipment, the exit velocity will probably be the easiest thing to test.
Yes.
It'll be far easier to test than spin generation.
You would think. I mean, I think it's easier to test the surface of a paddle.
Yes,
but
currently.
But the thing about the deflection or exit speed ratio, it needs to be done in a controlled environment. Right. So essentially it needs to be done in a lab if you really want an accurate reading. Now, maybe, and I don't know this for sure, maybe we can come up with something that's a little bit more primitive that could be done on site that would deter people from really breaking the rules. Maybe it couldn't catch something that's 10% over the limit, but it'll catch something that's 50% over the limit, something like that. And I'm the wrong person to talk to on that. Someone like Carl Schmitz would know a lot more than me. But I think that we could put something in place to where we could have a fix for that.
Yeah, something as simple as 20 millimeter thick paddle. Like
I've
that's
heard
a Daniel.
that paddle is pretty soft. Let's see how hard Daniel can hit it. With
This
the
is
new
true.
Lux.
I feel like I could survive a Daniel De La Rosa forehand from a Lux paddle.
To the forehead?
I didn't say that.
Okay. I think you could still hit it hard enough to where you'd have severe brain damage.
I already do.
Beyond the obvious.
Yeah. Well, okay. Obviously, you have watched all of Jill Braverman's podcasts. You are a big what's the podcast called?
Jilly B.
The Jilly B podcast.
I call it the Jill Braverman podcast. Yeah.
Okay.
So, did you actually catch the most recent one, and where she called the PPA the biggest cheater in the game?
I did not catch that podcast. I am unfamiliar with those words until you just spoke them. So.
Okay, Tommy, you want to take us through it?
Yeah. I mean, so I think we touched on it like for the most part from a high level, but basically it's like, okay, so there were 24 paddles confiscated that failed in Atlanta, which is up from 9 in San Clemente, but you were able to play with these paddles in the PPA, right? And then basically like, so the PPA doesn't have on-site deflection testing. They're only testing for roughness and core crushing, which causes like the trampoline effect core crushing does.
Yeah, the DLAM.
Whereas MLP is testing on-site for deflection. I actually don't understand the difference between the core crushing and deflection.
No, and you never have. So.
Are we going to walk Thomas through this again?
This is going to be the fourth time that I've explained it to you. So
maybe I should give it a
go. Yeah, we'll go for a ride.
That's not what this is about. It's about the fact that like MLP is testing for different things than PPA. And then in PPA, the most recent, there was an issue, and Jill really called it out on her podcast, where her and Tyro were playing Jade and Irina clearly had a hot paddle. And she was saying, it was just completely unfair. She felt it was a safety issue, not only giving her an unfair advantage. And the general question is like, well, why is the PPA not testing for something that MLP is clearly able to test for on site, which is why she went as far as saying PPA is the biggest cheater in the game, just to add some context.
Yeah, so right now, obviously, they're two very distinct tours, although the merger just happened. So there's going to be, different equipment, different rules in place. And for example, MLP banned the white paddles for the last event. PPA is waiting until the end of the year to ban the white paddles. So you can see one rule difference, just a simple one like that. I think it's an equipment issue to where PPA does not have the same equipment that MLP has on site. And I couldn't tell you exactly why that is, but you definitely see an issue here. And it seems that MLP is solving the deflection / exit speed ratio issue better than PPA right now. And in a perfect world, I would have that same equipment at a PPA and probably even more than that. So hopefully at some point we do have that. And I think all the players want it, because I feel like a lot of people view the paddle issue as a non-issue until they play against a paddle that's so good where they're like, this is not fair. Now I get it. Now I understand why people are complaining about a white paddle that's reflective, or a paddle that's really hot or really gritty. And until you experience that firsthand, I feel like a lot of people kind of say, it can't be that big of a difference. So I think it's a good thing when people bring up those issues. Now, whether the PPA is purposefully cheating for their players is a completely different statement,
right.
Which I don't agree with. I think the fact that they have testing and we're leading the way on testing surface roughness is a good thing, but it can definitely be improved.
Yeah.
So real quick,
okay.
What percent better could you be, or not you, just any player, going from a completely average paddle in every way to a paddle that is top of the line, best for their game, and they learn how to use it? Like, what percent of a player's skill do you think can be attributed to one of these paddles? What percent better does using a delaminated paddle make you?
Yeah, it's a good question.
If you can learn to play with it. Obviously.
If you can learn to play with it, and certainly it'll help some players more than others.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a good example is when amateurs come up to me and like, what paddle should I play with? And I said, well, I can't tell exactly what the right paddle is. I mean, obviously Colin John's paddle, but if you don't want to use that, you want to choose one of the main paddle brand manufacturers, because there's a big difference between the junk paddles that you buy at Walmart and good paddles. So if you stick to one of the main brands and you go for a few things that I think are important, something like good dimensions for an amateur. So if you're looking at like a 4.0 player, you want something that's a little bit wider, so fatter and less length, because typically people mishit the ball left and right, not up and down. So that's just a really easy one in terms of dimensions. And then you want to play with something a little bit more powerful, because why not? It's a big advantage in terms of counterpunching. And yes, you might miss a little bit more, but especially at amateur levels, you can overwhelm people with power. So little things like that can take somebody who was maybe a 4.0 player all the way up to probably a 4.5 player or more. If you have a D-Lam paddle where you're hitting the ball twice as hard as everyone else, you saw this with the spin serve that you're really familiar with. There were people that were winning.
Heard of it.
Never heard of it, right? There were people that were winning 5.0 tournaments with the spin serve, and then you took it away, and now these same people are not medaling at 4.0. I'm not singling anyone else out. It's just a fact to where this one thing is making somebody much, much better. And whether that was a fair rule change or not is a different conversation. But I think paddles fall in that same category, especially when you make it an extreme case. I mean, if you gave somebody literally a tennis racket, like that's the most extreme case that I can think of, yeah, they would go and win pro because they could hit the ball twice as hard as Ben. But I don't think that that's fair. So you definitely have to keep all those things in mind when you're selecting a paddle, and you should certainly maximize the paddle that you play with. Don't play with a piece of junk if you want to be a competitive player. And if there's something out there that is legal, but it's much better than everything else, go for it until it becomes illegal. So I would say that it makes you significantly better because it makes your skills just better, just because you have a better paddle in your hand. You don't have to make yourself any better. How much just varies a little bit person to person.
For anybody in Michigan who's listening, so we are doing with Bounce, which is the Pickleball app. They have an amateur tour. We're doing a pickleball tournament in Detroit at Court 4, and that's November 11th and 12th. I'll be there. We're going to get a bunch of people to come out. Trot Pickleball, this is your call to come out. Eddie and Webby, hopefully. And we'll get some other people in the Michigan area who are in the pickleball content game to come out. But yeah, it'll be a good tournament. I'm going to play in it. So come play against me. And yeah, it should be awesome.
Average pro player goes from using what they're sponsored with to the new Gearbox paddle. What percent?
All right, let's take Tyson as an example. He used to play with a really soft Selkirk before they came out with the 002 and those generations of paddles. And his counterpunching got significantly better with the new paddle because it's more hot. It comes back at you faster.
Dylan as an example too. He wasn't quite as soft before the
he had the
Onyx.
The Onyx one that Matt Wright used to use, the Premier, which was a little bit more of a hot paddle.
It was poppier.
It was poppier. So it wasn't as big of a difference as it was for Tyson because the first Selkirk he used was so soft. Now he's playing with probably the hottest paddle in pickleball, in my opinion, which is the Power Air / 002 generation of paddles. And it's made his counterpunching significantly better. And then if you look at the opposite with someone like Jay, who's playing with a Vulcan paddle that is not, let's just say it's not the best paddle in the market right now. His results have suffered in the past year because I feel like if he had a better paddle, he would be able to get more wins. Just my opinion. I'm not singling out Vulcan or anyone else saying that you're not trying to get a better paddle. It's just, I think that the paddle does make a difference.
Sounds like that's what you're saying.
Well,
continue.
It sounds like that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm clarifying that it's not what I'm saying, Thomas. But definitely makes a difference in both directions. If you have a really bad paddle, your results are going to suffer. If you have a really good paddle, your results are going to get better. And if you look at the Electrum players, obviously I was sponsored by Electrum in the past, but when they first came out with that first paddle, and it was the original Pro, all the Electrum players got good at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't really a coincidence to me, where Pat Smith, Lauren Stratman, Dane Gingrich, Baby Curios, I think Scott Crandall, they all seem to have better results overnight. And
And that was like paddlegate 1.
And that was paddlegate 1.
Mhm.
And obviously Electrum got into some hot water over a batch of paddles that were over the limit, but they were also the first ones to have that surface. So the carbon fiber surface in general changed the game. And those people definitely hit the ball harder and spinnier after having switched to that paddle. So I'm not saying that the results are necessarily 100% linked, but it's pretty suspicious when all of the players at the same time get significantly better when they switch paddles. I would say that is definitely something that was helpful to them.
Yeah. I mean, you
What
went
fucking percentage?
what percentage? I can't give you a percentage. I don't know, 25, 30.
Dang, okay.
They can't. Up to 25,
Okay.
30%, depending on who you are. Because
Okay. Sure.
if you're Daniel De La Rosa, I don't think you need more power.
Right.
Let's try to get him a Lux and see if he can.
Fair. I'd put the bell curve centered maybe around 15% better. With outliers
All
on
right,
either
that's
side.
fair. If we have to settle on a percentage,
Yes, we have to settle on
15, ceiling 25. I don't know. That's just a ballpark.
Come on, man. We need a clip for this one. we need a title for the YouTube video. Help us out, bro. Colin John says 25% better.
That's the high end.
And Vulcan's trap.
No, I never said that.
This is gonna be a great title.
Oh my gosh.
But okay, so to what degree though is the player responsible to acknowledge, hey, okay, I clearly have a hot paddle, and holster it and switch it out for another, if at all? Because we've had the issues of, Leia calling out Salome, just recently Jill calling out Irina. We've had other instances of it. Like, do you think it's on Salome? Do you think it's on Irina to be like, you know what? Yeah, this paddle's clearly hot. The ref agrees. All the players agree. I can tell. I should put this aside and go for another paddle.
It's hard to really put that on the player because there's not a really distinct rule. It's not like, oh, if I hit the ball this miles per hour, that's clearly over the limit. Now, delamination is a different issue because it's very easy to tell when your paddle's delaminated. It sounds different. You get that Rice Krispie treat sort of feel if you squeeze the core.
Oh, everybody can tell except for the refs.
Yeah, except for the refs for some reason. I was like, I will train all the refs in existence to single out the delam paddles. It'll take me like 5 minutes.
If you hear a gunshot, it's not a gunshot. It's a delaminated.
Yeah, it's a delaminated paddle. That's pretty much the end of the conversation. So I think delam is different. The other thing that I would put on the players is if the paddle is testing at a very high rate before the match, you should be skeptical about using because it's pretty easy to rotate it out. Where let's say you have a paddle that tests at 43 and the margin of error at PPAs is within, I think it's 43. If it gets,
are we talking 43 in the delamination or
no,
in
grit?
In grit, yeah.
So the grit test. So the limit's 40, but you can go up to 43 because of the margin for error on the machine. So if a player sees that their paddle's coming in at like 43 or 42.8, maybe you use a different paddle because it's like, hey, it is over the limit. It's before the match. I know the limit's 40. Like I could get away with using this paddle, but morally I would feel like you shouldn't do that. That's just me. I'm not saying that they're breaking the rules necessarily. The tour is saying, here's what the limit is. Here's what you can use. You can use all the way up to that. But personally, I feel like that would be giving me an advantage that would not be completely the morally high ground. That would be the only other thing that I would put on the player. But something like deflection, it's really hard because there's a very fine line between a hot paddle and an illegal paddle, as long as it's not delaminated.
Mm.
So what do you think the rule is? If the rule is supposed to be 40, but there's a margin of error and up to 43, what is the actual rule? Or is the standard 40 or is the standard 43?
So that's something that changed at PPAs because back in the day when they first started testing paddles, it was only if you challenged the paddle that they would test it. So they had to put in a margin of error because the test was not completely reliable. So in other words, if you did the average of 6 directions and it came in at 41, the next time you did it, it could come in at 38 just because there's a margin of error with the equipment. So they didn't want to penalize somebody who was potentially getting hosed on a bad test. So they were doing multiple tests, and then they also put in the rule that it can be up to 43, but not 44, to help with the challenge system. Now, after the challenge system went away and you had to test the paddles before the match. Not that it completely went away. You can still challenge the paddles, but quarterfinals on at a PPA, you have to test your paddles before the match. So you know what the reading is before you even play. They put the stickers on. So that's what I'm talking about, where if you're testing your paddles before the match and you see that they're over 40, you know that they're over the limit. And the PPA knows that they're over the limit. So it's pretty simple. Just say, don't use this paddle. We caught the paddle beforehand. Good thing. And here's one that's 39.8. You're welcome to use the 39.8. So that's sort of what I mean. And that's also how the testing evolved for the PPA. Because at first it was margin of error because it was a challenge system. But after the challenge system became more of a secondary option and they're testing before the match, you know before the match whether it's over 40 or not. So it's unnecessary to put the new limit at 43. That's just not dumb in my opinion.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll agree to disagree. If you're not going to disqualify it underneath 43, I have no problem with it. If you're over the margin of error and over 43, you don't get to play with that paddle. And you know, with something like surface roughness or spin, you know that the texture is never going to go up, right? You know that you're, except unless there's a margin of error, like different reading, whatever, your paddle's not going to objectively get grittier throughout a match.
It won't get grittier for sure.
It could read differently, but
that's why the rule has changed for PPA, because if we're saying we're agreeing that the limit is 40 and the only reason that we're putting it at 43 is for margin of error, if you catch a paddle before the match that's over 40, it's over the limit. That's all I'm saying.
And I think that's a fair enough take. I guess my counter to that would be like, if they're not taking it out of competition, if it's under 43, you could say that the rule is 30, but we have a 25% margin of error. I think all of that is irrelevant. It should be black and white.
Well,
this is an eliminated number.
I'm more saying that if we're saying the limit's 40, then why should it be above 40?
Okay, I agree. I'll agree with you. We want to say the limit's 40. I think the margin of error thing is kind of dumb, to be honest. Like, let's just have a black and white number, regardless of that margin of error. And I do think that it's good to have testing preemptively where you can, right? So something that we've done with our paddles, and it's in all of our Pro XR contracts, is when testing is available ahead of time, like we have to get our paddle tested to make sure that we're not playing with something that is above whatever standard it is, whether it's 40 or 43, right? Because I don't want to break the rule, but I want to be as close to the rule as possible.
Clearly, for performance, I would want mine 39.9 every time.
Sure. So, like, if it's 40, like, let's get it tested for 40. If it's 40 with a margin of error, like, I think effectively, the rule then is 43.
Exactly, which I think is dumb. If you're going to put the limit at 40, keep it at 40. And there are other ways to do it, where you could say, all right, we'll test the average of 6 directions 3 different times. And if the average of those 3 tests is below 40, then you're good. So let's say you have one outlier test that's 41, and then the other one's 39, and the last one's 38. You're good, because it's got the average of those 3 tests is going to be below 40.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're on the same page. I think that the margin of error thing is
the margin of error makes it confusing. So I'm just saying, don't arbitrarily make it 43 just because of this margin of error.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're on the same page.
Okay, glad we
hashed that out, huh?
No, I think this is what a very small subset of our viewers wants to hear.
Yeah, right. Very small. All right, let's talk about the tour wars. I mean, like, what has been your general take? I saw you over at Austin Pickle Ranch in the midst of the race for talent, and I remember looking at you and being like, "What do you think of all this?" And then I stopped and I go, "You don't care. You're kind of just chilling, right?" You were signed with PPA from the get-go, you and Ben, right? And so you just watched the rest of it play out. But, I mean, what was that like? What's your general take on the two kind of going head-to-head, now ultimately coming to a merger here? Are you tired of the endless search for the perfect court? Well, say goodbye to court hunting hassles with Swimply, your go-to solution for hassle-free court rentals. So whether you're planning a pickleball party or just want to enjoy a friendly match, Swimply has got you covered. With Swimply, you can easily find and book private courts that suit your game and your schedule. Just download their app, browse available courts in your area, and book the one that's perfect for you. Beautiful backyard pickleball courts are just a tap away. It's an Airbnb for pickleball courts. It's actually a super cool concept. So don't let the court hunt hold you back. Dive into the world of Swimply today. Visit swimply.com or find them in the App Store. Escape locally with Swimply.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And certainly we had something like this happen last year where there was merger and then, it got revoked. And there's been a lot of back and forth. And obviously, there are some definite pros about having everyone under the same umbrella and playing together, the best playing against the best. And whether it's an MLP or PPA, I think the sport as a whole is more watchable to the viewership if everyone is playing under the same umbrella. That being said, I think that two separate tours in some ways is kind of nice because you have a completely different environment. And if they're merged, there's going to be some overlap on the feel of the events when you go there. So it was cool to me to go to MLP the first part of this year and feel like it was a different entity. You see different people there. It's a totally different vibe. Even a little bit of different rules. You have the rally scoring, obviously. You have the team event. That makes it cool. And I think a lot of people like to watch it because of that. And not that that's going to go away, but whenever you merge something, it's going to become a little bit more uniform event to event. And to answer your question on me personally, certainly you have to make the best decision for you. And obviously Ben and I were going to go in the same direction for obvious reasons. But one of the big things for us is that we built our personal brand on being the best doubles team in the world together. And what a lot of people forget at MLP is you're not going to have the luxury of being able to play together. So had we gone to MLP, it would have been, sabotaging our personal brand in a way. Not that the other tournaments are going to go away, but from the very beginning, that was our goal, and that's what we've gotten to. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to then go to a tour to where you can't have that anymore. So that was sort of an elephant in the room to me. And obviously there's money being thrown around. There are different, loyalties or what have you, different conversations you have. There's a lot of personal stuff that goes into making the right decision for you. And I don't begrudge anybody who made a personal decision based on what they were being offered. Certainly some feelings were hurt on loyalties or what have you, but I don't want to judge too harshly. Certainly some of these numbers that you're hearing are life-changing numbers. Some people have families and they're going to make decisions based on what they feel is best for them. But I do think that the average wage of a pickleball player was just arbitrarily driven up drastically. So I think everyone who happened to be fortunate enough to be a player or a top player in this time is extremely lucky. And we should be grateful for that, to where we're getting paid probably, in my opinion, higher than the market value of a pickleball player should be. But who am I to say what it should be? Maybe it's low. I don't know. But in my opinion, I think that we're getting overpaid, if anything. So just be grateful for what we got. And I want to make the most of that and expand the sport as much as possible in the next few years.
I like it. It's a good answer, dude. You maybe go into politics at some point.
That was the politically correct answer, Thomas. And
Yeah.
I know both people. I mean, the people on both sides. I enjoy playing MLP. I enjoy playing PPA. And even in the very beginning, there was APP, and I played some events there. I don't have anything against any one of those entities. I think it's all good for pickleball, and competition is good. It makes the other entities raise their game. You looked at that the first year with APP and PPA. I feel like APP is like, well, we're going to do this, and PPA is, well, we're going to do this. And it made it better for the players, and it raised the standards for everybody. And whenever you raise the standards for everybody, I think the product as a whole gets better. So I'm a huge fan of competition, and I think it's been a good thing.
Yeah, my hope here under a merged entity, and it's sounding a little bit like this, but this is all subject to change, is that they do keep, it's sounding like they're going to keep MLP and PPA as distinct brands for a little bit, feel it out for a few years and see, maybe we go under everything under the PPA umbrella, and you have the PPA tour and the PPA team. Or maybe we toss everything under the MLP umbrella and we have the MLP tour and the MLP team events. Like, it sounds like they're still going to be pitting the entities against each other a little bit, just in terms of what plays better to your average viewer. Because I think that they recognize as well that the competition between the different entities, whether that's APP, MLP, or PPA, I think has raised the standard for the game over the last few years. That's for sure. So
Yeah, no doubt. Something that I do think will be positive out of the merger is that you're going to save overhead costs quite a bit. So if you look at the next upcoming event where it's nationals and MLP, the setup is just so much easier. And same thing when you put any event back to back, like the San Clemente one and the MLP one at the end of the year, the setup where you're going to put up the video boards and the sponsor banners and all that and have everyone in one place and all that, you're going to save a lot of money and resources by doing that. So to not do that is a huge opportunity lost to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Well, we got some quotes from Tim Parks before this.
We did. Why?
We kind of walk through. Like,
all right, yeah,
news,
go for it.
Right, which is Steve Kuhn's resignation. So if I could make it super concise, right? So we're headed into the merger. Finally, everything seems to be hashed out.
Wait, the merger? You gotta back that up.
The final merger.
The final merger.
The most recent merger.
The most recent merger. Yeah, no. Okay.
In that, Al Tylas and Jason Stein come in and they, write a check for $50 million and kind of become what I would say is the most, as individuals, they hold the most power essentially, right? And the most influence. Ahead of this merger, right? Late last week, Steve Kuhn calls a board meeting of just Major League Pickleball, but discludes Al Tylas and Jason Stein. He presents somewhat of an alternative, not saying we shouldn't do the merger, but let's auction off more teams, let's raise some more capital. And that is a departure from what was agreed upon for the merger. In that meeting, sort of does his rallying cry, which I think has worked in the past. It becomes apparent that he doesn't have as much allegiance as he once did from the various players within Major League Pickleball. Players meaning stakeholders. After that meeting, or in that meeting, 2 people on the board resign. And after that...
Do we know which 2 those were?
No, we don't. But then a third resigned, which was Al Tylas. He goes, you know what? Screw it. This is like chaos again. Not what we talked about. This is BS. I'm resigning. After that, Steve Kuhn ultimately tenders his own resignation with an email to all Major League Pickleball stakeholders, which unfortunately is now circulating on Twitter, so you can probably go track that down. But essentially he said, I'm sorry, I let the emotions get the best of me. I'm going to go my separate ways. I just want to continue to run Duper and the other ventures I have. I'd like to be free of essentially litigation. And I wish you all the best, right? And so that kind of brings us to where we are now. And
if I'm not wrong, the CEO also resigned. Is that correct? Julio of MLP? I thought I read that somewhere, but
yeah,
I could be wrong.
I think I heard that too. He might have been one of those resignations from the Major League Pickleball board when Steve held that first meeting, right?
Okay. That's unconfirmed, so
Yeah. And honestly, in the wake of this, I'm not sure of those people who did resign before Steve did, if those people now after Steve has resigned are sort of back in the picture and like
who the heck
took
knows,
back
right?
their resignation, right? So I'm not totally sure. But yeah, so Monday we published an article saying, Steve Kuhn resigns, which I think is just a crazy development because obviously he founded it. It was his vision. And here we are a couple months ago. The picture was very, very, very different, right? There was the race for talent, and now Steve is out of the picture. Connor is no longer the CEO. At least he won't be of like the new joint entity. And from what we're hearing, they're going to proceed with this merger. So that's sort of the gist of all the recent developments. Did I get that pretty accurately?
Yes, I mean, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
there might be recent developments here in the last 3 minutes, so
Right.
this is the most up to date that we currently have between the 3 of us.
Well, there's been more owners meetings since then.
Yeah,
and it seems like everybody's on the same page again.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a win for me, I feel like.
Yeah, I hope so. Hope we all still get paid. That would be a good thing.
But I mean, I think to your point, I think the value of a player, I guess, is what the market pays. But I mean, objectively, I would say I think we're pretty overpaid.
Yes, objectively, I think everyone can agree we're overpaid. But again, who's setting that standard? It's hard to really say. Pickleball's so new, it may have taken a jump that nobody anticipated, and it may stabilize there. I don't know, but it does seem like we're getting a heck of a lot more for doing the exact same thing we were doing last year.
That's always nice.
That's always nice. I'm not gonna say that I'm not happy about it.
What else do we have? What else do we have on that, Tommy?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just like the question of like, do you foresee, 2-3 years from now when these, inflated contracts expire, does average pay get greatly reduced? And what does that mean for players if this is the new expectation, only for it to change in a couple years from now?
That's so hard to answer. I've given up trying to predict what's going to happen in pickleball. Like 3 years from now, who the heck knows? By the end of 2026, we could have a whole different landscape with new players that are asking for new figures, potentially other bigger sponsors in the game, or we could have a downturn for whatever reason. I don't see that happening, but that's impossible to answer. And it's hard to see them paying out as many people. Now, the total number might stay the same, maybe, but the amount of players that were signed, it seems a little excessive for what pickleball can handle right now. And you have to remember that the tours ultimately long-term want to make money. Mm-hmm. And how they do that is certainly up to them. But it seems like having that extensive of a payroll is a bit unnecessary for them.
Which players do you think were unnecessary?
Point. Oh, I'm not naming names.
Damn it.
Definitely not going there. But just in terms of raw numbers.
I tried, Tommy.
Yeah, you tried. But at a certain point when you get to the 40th or whatever number, it's like, do we really need to pay this person this amount? If you look at it from their perspective, you got to think not. But right now, that's not the case. So in 3 years, again, I don't have a crystal ball. I have no idea. Maybe there will be more players that are signed to bigger contracts. Certainly be a good thing for me and Zane, because hopefully we have longevity of Matt Wright. That would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think the key to having longevity like Matt Wright is a lot of whiskey and gummy bears. That's his secret.
I think so. Yeah. And not bending his knees.
Yes. No, I don't think he has meniscuses anymore. Menisci.
Yeah. How do you say the plural of meniscus?
I figured you knew.
Menisci?
That sounds right. Menisci.
It sounds better.
It sounds good.
I just say Matt Wright is a unicorn. Nobody plays like him. Nobody can repeat that. He can play to 47.
And what do you
the top players?
What do you call the unicorn?
That's a good question. He's the original unicorn.
Okay.
Matt Wright is a unicorn. He is not the unicorn.
Got it. Okay. Noted. Thanks for
important stuff here.
This is true. This is true.
Well,
speaking of which, Matt Wright's results have been solid.
Recently. Yeah, no, he's a GOAT.
Yeah.
100%.
No matter who his partner is, he always seems to be fighting for medals. So hats off to Matt Wright, 47 years old.
So next year, when Ben is playing full-time with Eric, are you going to be playing with Matt Wright?
I mean, Matt and I have a great relationship, but I think he's committed to James from what I hear. So at that point, I don't know. I was going to ask PPA if Annalie Waters could play with me on the male side. That was my plan.
Okay. How do you think you guys would do?
Fifth, sixth, probably consistently. I feel like, yeah. If he plays the left, if I'm on the left, probably first round loss.
Well, I wasn't going to say it, but you said.
We all know. Collin's left side game relative to his right side game is significantly worse.
So on that note, let's say you can't play with Ben anymore. Which other players do you feel like you would match up best with? Like, obviously you're sticking to the right. Like, who else is high on your list of players to play with?
Yeah, I definitely need a good left side guy who's aggressive. So my MLP teammate, JW Johnson, I feel like his left side game is awesome, and looking forward to playing the next event with him. Still working out the kinks in that first event. So I feel like we can be a lot better in the second event and definitely the third event. And I'd definitely be up for playing tournaments with anyone who's in that same mold. Declan and I played Red Rock together this year, made it to the final, had match points in the final. So someone like Deco, a good friend of mine, has power, likes the left. Another person that I would like to play with, AJ Kohler and I got to the final of Orange County last year, another good left side player. James Ignatowicz, we played a tournament this year that did not go super well, but I feel like we could do well together. So really anyone who's in that aggressive left side mold, that would be a poor man's Ben, would be someone who I would look for in men's doubles.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. And so we had this question, we had a stop Alzheimer's question a couple times ago. Who do we think are the top 5 right side players? And we might as well ask the winningest right side player currently. Who are the top 5 right side players?
Top 5 right side players. All right, we'll go with the easy ones first. So we'll go with me, Matt, and Dylan. The other 2, it gets a little bit more hazy. So obviously Pablo Tejas has had a great year with Federico. I feel like they, consistency-wise, have been the 3rd best team. So we'll give the nod to Pablo right now because he consistently plays the right side, and he's done very well this year. There are a lot of people that are left side players most of the time that can play a good right side. So someone like Deckel, he's versatile. He can play both sides of the court. DJ Young can play both sides of the court. So it's hard to put them in that category, even though they might be in the running. We're kind of focusing on the people that most of the time play the right side.
Yeah.
And Tyson is also in that category, but I feel like he's another really solid right side player where you feel like when you put him on the right, he's in a natural environment for him. He has the skill set over there to do a lot of damage. So I guess we can put Tyson in that top 5, but there are a lot of different answers that you could put there where, like I said, Deckel can move over and play the right. But I think the more obvious answers are the ones that are playing the right consistently all the time with their left side partner and doing well.
Yeah, no, I'd say that's a fair way of phrasing the question because we don't want to evaluate Ben as a right side player.
Yeah,
right?
because
like,
he's
never
two Bens
really
would be
there.
pretty tough.
Where do you think? Okay, how good is Ben if he can never go onto the left side? Like he's stacked on the right side consistently. Like, how good is he as a right side player? Obviously, very, very good. But is he a dominant right side player, as you and I have discussed in practice?
I'm sure that he would figure it out. But I have some funny clips that I've saved over the years where we get switched sides, or he and Annalise switch sides.
We're gonna need those.
Yes, we're gonna need those. Where he gets a dink into the first row of the crowd from the right side, and we're like, "What happened to the good Ben? Like you put him on the right side, and now
it was going in from the left side."
Yeah, all hell broke loose as soon as
memory.
he switched sides of the court, which I don't blame him. He hasn't played the right in like years, but he has played the right in the past with Matt Wright briefly, Kyle Yates briefly. So it's not like everything changes, and with his skill set, I'm sure he'd figure it out just fine.
He'd figure it out. Interesting. All right. So I noticed one thing you didn't have, and this could have completely been an oversight, but like you didn't have Riley as a top 5 right side player. Do you think he's not a top 5 right side player, or are you more so considering him a left side player?
I would put him in the left side category. His skill set is much more suited to the left side, and although he plays the right side quite a bit with his partners, it's not his natural environment, and his weaknesses are accentuated on the right side, and his strengths are exaggerated on the left side. So I put him in the left side category.
Got it. Okay, interesting. And what do you think of the breakup? Do you guys miss Matt and Riley?
They were a very good team. They were our best competition over the past year. So I always enjoyed the matchups because I enjoy the challenge. But certainly the breakup has not been good for either one of them, but specifically for Riley. I mean, he's made one final on the men's side since he broke up with Matt, and that was with J-Dub and Dylan not in the draw, and me and Ben not in the draw. So that has not proved to be a good decision, at least so far. And we want to play the best of the best. So we think both of those players are good players, and I'm sure they're going to find other good partners to compete with. And I was really actually interested to see how James and Matt were going to play together, because I think that's a lot of artillery. They have a lot of firepower, and it was going to be fun to play them in Vegas. And unfortunately, James rolled his ankle, and we were not able to play that team. But I'm sure that team is going to be dangerous in the future.
Mm-hmm. Do you think they have a better? And I'm not saying that they're going to like beat you, but do they have a better makeup as a team of skills that would test you than a Matt and Riley?
It would be hard to say without playing them first. So
Fair.
the transition game is going to be a little bit more shaky with the James and Matt scenario, and the defense is going to be a little bit less, but the power at the line is going to be significantly increased. So it's a matter of, relative to how often they get in, how much damage can they do at the line. So if they get hot and it's the right conditions, they could present a real issue because they like to speed up a lot of balls. They have heavy hands, and if they get hot, you never know. So you got to pay attention all the time. Make sure your counter punches are up to par. James has a big drive, which would be an advantage for them. But I think if we played
you got to watch out for Matt crashing after that.
Yeah, where Matt, he might not be as fast as he once was, but
he anticipates well. I've never seen a 47-year-old dude or whatever the hell he is.
I mean,
Ernie like Matt. He can actually step around and hit Ernie's.
And he bakes with the backhand pretty well. I mean, I hope I can bake that well at 47 when off the backhand. But yeah, James would get a lot of the returns. And
I don't think I've ever seen you shake one of Ben's bakes.
I did one time. I remember.
We're gonna need that clip too.
Yes, I will find it for you. It happened one time in history, so that's not really one of our MOs. Ben usually shakes and bakes.
Yeah, he does it all.
He does it all. Pretty much the whole game plan is Ben to do everything.
I mean, you probably hit still a majority of the shots.
I feel like that's changed in recent years. I feel like if you charted how many balls I got over the course of the match versus how many he got, I feel like he hits more balls now. Whereas when I first started playing, the plan was to hit every ball to Collin. And then I feel like back in maybe 2020 or 2021, I think 2021, people figured out that maybe that's not the best game plan, because if you hit everything to Collin, he knows it's coming, and Ben's essentially just going to end up on his side, and you're playing 2 versus 1.
Mm-hmm.
Versus if you keep Ben on his side, maybe we have a better chance. And it was Pat and Jay that originally first started using that strategy. And it was also dependent on the skill set that they had, where Pat is a really good counterpuncher, and he was able to slow Ben down enough to where they felt comfortable dinking to Ben. But I bet that in many of our matches now, he would hit slightly more balls than I did.
Interesting. Okay.
Also because he's playing more of the court. Obviously, anything in the middle is going to be his forehand. I'm going to let that through. He's going to be hitting those. And then also the third shots. Most of the time, people return to Ben. And I would attribute that to keeping him back an extra shot, because you don't really up the amount of shots that he gets, where they're going to target him with the third shots, with their returns, and also in transition, because transition is obviously one of my better things.
You know that meme where it says, where somebody's golden retriever is like staring at them, and it says the odds of getting killed by a golden retriever are next to 0, but not none.
But not none.
The odds of getting poached by Collin Johns.
Yes, I feel like we can make a meme out of that.
Agreed. Love it. So last question on your game style with Ben. If you had to, like, again, percentage, generalization, this is not the case in every single match, but what % of the court would you say is your responsibility versus Ben's? And obviously that depends on where the ball is. It depends on a lot of things. But generally, if we looked at a flow chart of where the ball is being struck throughout a point, and it's charted, what % of the court do you think Ben plays versus you play?
And can you apply that to amateur play? Because the last time we had this conversation, you were saying that pickleball should not be played 50-50.
Yeah, definitely not. And like you said, it's very dependent on who you're playing, where the ball is, a lot of factors, the incoming angle of the ball. But if I had to put a number on it, I would say 70-30. So I'd probably take 30%, he takes 70%, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But if I had to ballpark it, it would be something like that. And for the amateurs, it really depends on your skill set. Not everyone moves around the court like Ben does. And if you're exposing yourself too much by playing 80% of the court, you may want to dial that back a little bit. But definitely the game is not meant to be played 50-50. And the closest you could have to that is if you had a left-handed Ben playing for me, where then they could, any middle ball, the left-handed Ben could take it, or the right-handed Ben, depending on what you want to do with the play. But that would be the most pure sort of example you could have. That's not really going to happen in reality. At least it hasn't happened yet. So you definitely don't want to approach it 50-50, but you don't want to overplay your hand to where you're playing a little bit too much of the court. And you see some of these guys in mixed tend to fall into that trap where they're really aggressive and they win a lot of points by being aggressive, but they overstretch themselves against certain teams and they get exposed in the backside. So it's give and take. It's like, all right, you give something up, but you're going to win more points this way. So you really have to find the right game style for you and for your team. So how we came to our game style and why I feel like it works so well is we recognized from the very beginning that Ben was always going to play left. He wanted a right side player with a certain skill set that would complement him best. And it also stemmed from the fact that when I first started playing, Ben was already the best player. So he was significantly better than me. So he was always going to take more shots from the start. And we sort of worked it out as we went along. This works really well, and here's how far Ben can go. But then as I got better, in certain scenarios, it made more sense for me to play more shots, just based on the position. So I feel like we've worked out a game style that at this point is pretty seamless, that allows the best player in the world, which is Ben, to touch the ball a lot and put a lot of pressure. And people have not been able to crack the code to exposing Ben's backside very often, and then it just allows me to and until somebody's able to figure out a strategy that will consistently beat us, we're going to keep playing exactly the same way.
Fair. Good answer. Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, you catch some crap sometimes, right? On Collin's only playing whatever percentage of the court, but like that's by design.
It's by design, exactly.
I mean, in basketball, like you could say that, look, somebody's shooting most of the team's shots. I'm like, okay, well, how good are they? Are they making them? Like, is the team winning? Like, it's pretty honestly irrelevant when you look at the wins and losses. Like, you just want to do what's going to be best for your team, which I think it's still not an easy role.
It's not, and it's underestimated at times. And you play the right side a fair amount, and people will often ask me, what does it take to be a good right side player? And the first thing I say is the mentality. You can't be in the mentality of having an ego and trying to win the point for your team. Your job is to make your partner look good. And they're going to get the winners most of the time. And you're not going to get the credit for the winners most of the time. But if you do a really good job of passing the ball to your partner, like in basketball or other sports, you have enormous value, and your partners are going to love playing with you, and they're going to play better. So your job as the right side player is to make your partner look as good as possible. It's not to win the match for your team, except in very specific circumstances.
Clip that. That's going to do well. So Connor Pardo told me that FanDuel lost a bunch of money in the first few weekends because everybody was just betting the house on you and Ben. It's got to be a nice vote of confidence for you.
Oh, were they? I have no idea. I haven't checked into the betting part. I don't think we're supposed to.
Yeah,
I
right.
think that's another in our gambling.
Another
training.
good political answer. You have all of FanDuel's.
Well,
right now.
It's familiar to me because when I played pro tennis, we had to go through this integrity course where it's like you can't talk to this person, you can't go on these.
Did you guys have that for pickleball?
For tennis, we did. But for pickleball, there's a course that we're supposed to take. I still think that we have to complete it, but definitely because pickleball is so new, there are some players that would have no idea what all would be okay and not okay.
Yeah.
And once it gets a little bit more mainstream with the betting, you really got to be careful on what you do. So because of the background I have, I kind of know already not to do certain things, but you'll definitely have some issues in the next year or two with certain players if they don't control it.
Yeah, Pardo told me that they're pretty much just like at this point, we're just not going to offer odds on anything that Ben plays in.
That would be a pretty safe bet. I would say the Anna Lee bet in women's doubles is even safer. So
Yeah.
bet on Anna Lee to win women's doubles, and you're going to win pretty much every time. So FanDuel might not be putting odds on that.
What else you got, Zane?
Let's see.
The only other thing I wanted to ask you about, so like you play a little bit of pro.
Never mind. Go ahead.
You got to be ready.
Just keep the
You got to have
notes
it.
up.
You obviously played pro tennis. I assume you follow pro tennis and you are an avid consumer of that. Like obviously there's the rumblings that the Bryan Bros are going to come into pickleball. I don't know if that's happening. I don't know what the developments are there, but obvious parallels between John's Bros and pickleball, Bryan Bros and tennis. What do you see as like if you were to forecast their success? And I mean, what's just like your general take on that overall?
Yeah, actually, MLP, I was at an event where I met their agent, and he told me a little bit about their interest level and how they arrived at potentially pursuing pickleball. And apparently they had played with Jack Sock and somebody else, and they'd actually enjoyed it a lot more than they had first thought they would. And they're like, well, what can we do to get more involved? And I don't know how far they're going to jump in, but it would be really cool to have them, the name recognition, and obviously two great racket skills players. They're going to be good, and they mesh really well together as a doubles team. I don't know exactly how old they are. I think they're 47, so the perfect Matt Wright age. But clearly that's something where...
I think it's like 45,
47. I don't know exactly,
yeah.
But it's something where someone like Jack Sock is going to have a leg up on them because they're starting to age more, and he's a better athlete than they are.
Yeah.
So they're definitely going to be good. How good, it really depends, again, on how well you adapt to certain things, what sort of training you get, how much you play the tournaments, because you can train all day long by yourself with great training, but until you start to go to the tournaments and see all the top players and all the funky shots that exist and get a little bit of tournament experience, you're not going to do as well as you would like. And you can certainly transfer a lot of the same things that you use in tennis to pickleball, but it's a little bit different in certain elements, and getting that competition experience is definitely valuable. So I'd love to see them jump in. I'd love to have them do an event. I think it's great for the game.
Talk some shit.
Talk some shit?
You got to light a fire.
Oh, that's $20, by the way.
Well, let's
Swear jar, baby. Let's go. I'm not the only one.
You got to show me the fine print before you do that to me.
No.
No. No F-bombs were dropped. So I think that making out with a $20 fine is good.
Yeah, fair. I dropped one.
Yeah.
But to be fair, you're being an ass.
I wouldn't give you a percentage. Gosh darn it. I avoided the fine there. All right, so you want me to talk some trash to the Bryan brothers. I don't know if I'm going to do that, but they would beat us worse in tennis than we would beat them in pickle. But I think that they would be surprised at how difficult it would be to play against us on the pickleball court.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Clip it, send it to the agent, light a fire.
I think, yeah, that will really get them going.
That's such a soft chirp. All right, Zane. Now the floor is yours. You had brilliant question.
No, well, you have Katy Perry written on the little thing over here. I saw she's giving away a pickler franchise.
Yeah. Okay, so
what?
It's Katy Perry, her Firework Foundation. It's the Pickler and us. So it's like a 2-part giveaway. So even if you just enter the giveaway, you get a $20 gift card to the Pickler shop. So gear, paddles, apparel, whatever. There's like over 50 winners. So pretty much everybody wins, because if you just enter the giveaway, you get the $20 gift card. But you can also win, I think 10 people win like a paddle of their choice. A bunch of people will win, I can't remember the exact numbers. A bunch of people will win lifetime supply of pickleball gear. A bunch of people will win lifetime supply of pickleball apparel. Last second, we threw in somebody's going to win the ability to be a special guest on this podcast, which I don't think you know about.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to find that out.
But then it's all wrapped into
Charles
like
Manson signing up right now.
Oh boy,
it's all wrapped into this like bigger
I
giveaway.
can think of worse people, to be honest.
I probably could as well.
I got to finish my giveaway pitch here. Okay. It's all wrapped
we're
into
having
this
a
bigger
conversation over
giveaway.
here.
Okay.
Where, so basically everybody votes on a city, and any city is eligible. and the city that gets the most votes, the pickler is going to build a franchise in that city. And so essentially the idea is we're giving away a pickleball facility to one lucky town or city, whichever one that may be. So,
Well, that's a real opportunity there.
yeah. Thanks for agreed. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to pitch that one.
Yeah,
Appreciate that.
no problem.
I
I
guess
just
need to work on your ball passing skills. I feel like there are two left side players that are not passing. Like
Interesting.
Right side
honestly, we'd be so much better if I was on the left and he was just in like permanent Ernie position over there.
We're not on a pickleball court, Zane.
You sure you don't want to start a podcast? That was a good little analysis there.
No plans to.
No John's Bros podcast coming.
Not in the near future. Don't expect to see that soon.
You guys can talk about like paddle engineering and
Yeah, I think
stats and
But the thing is, we can come on your podcast and say everything we need to say. And
Yeah, but
well,
I
this is the last time you're invited
Yeah,
to
like
this.
Okay.
And I had to beg you for weeks. and then right before the pod, like an hour before, he's like, "Oh, my car broke down." I'm like, "Here we go." Like
that is a fact. My car is in the shop right now,
yeah,
but hopefully it'll be fixed by the time we finish.
but you made it.
So we actually we did just get a text from MLP and said that circling back to what we said, Steve Kuhn has resigned from his leadership positions with MLP. We thank him for his numerous contributions as founder of MLP and bringing professional pickleball to the forefront of sports. MLP will continue to fuel the growth of our league and teams with, I can't read. Hold on, pause.
Sounds like a very political sort of announcement.
It does. With the ideal combination of players, owners, and partners. We wanted to share that official league statement with you, which will be posted to MLP's website momentarily. Additionally, please note that Duper has been spun off and is no longer a subsidiary of MLP. So it sounds like Steve is, totally out. And I think there's a lot of players that I think every single player owes a lot to Steve, right? And I think it's safe to say that while it may not have garnered the support of board and MLP owners, I think that he's the reason that every player, PPA or MLP, is getting a substantial pay increase. So
yeah, I would second that. He's contributed mightily to the sport of pickleball, and it wouldn't be where it is today without him. So definitely want to tip our hat to Steve on that and thank him for his contributions. And obviously, sounds like he's parting ways with MLP. So I'm sure he'll be around. And thank you for your contributions.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that as things settle down and if we get into a better spot a little bit down the road, I'd hope that both sides could come together and still have Steve around. It wouldn't be MLP without Steve around.
Yeah, I hope he comes to the events at least. That would
one way or another.
It'd
or
be a shame if not.
Maybe an expansion team feels like a reasonable thing for the return that he's made to his investors. I mean, say what you want about blowing out the spending this go around. He 100x'd his investors' return in like 2 years. So anyway, thank you to Steve. We hope to see you around at MLP events. And what's the saying? Hope this isn't a goodbye. It's a see you later.
Paraphrasing it.
Something along those lines.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe once the dust settles, we can get him on the pod to unwrap everything that happened. It'd be interesting.
Yeah. Well, last but not least, Collin, why do you hate the net cord so much? And better
I
question,
thought this might come up.
why does the net cord hate you?
That's a better question, honestly. One that I'm still searching for the answer for. But yeah, the net cord definitely has been known to irritate me, to put it mildly. I guess that it really stems from that you're hitting what I consider to be a lot of times a low percentage shot that works out in your favor, and there's absolutely nothing that I can do about it. And it's not always the case. Sometimes it's a good attack and you hit a good shot. But other times, if you're pulling the trigger on, I don't know, a ball from your shoelaces at mid-court and it catches the tape and I can't recover in time because it catches the tape, that irritates me, both for the reason that I can't do anything about it and that you're getting away with something that I consider to be not a smart thing to do. So I think that those would be the two biggest reasons why sometimes I have to throw my hat, throw out my hands, and drop my paddle and make a scene. Because
I love that you gave like a decently serious answer there. Like actually hates the net cord.
I do hate it. It's easily my biggest pet peeve in pickleball.
Do you when like memes of pickleball or these other accounts, like it's just like a highlight reel of you just rolling your eyes and throwing up your hands? Like what do you?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
you
I
just
think
laugh
there's some
at
pretty
that.
good memes out there.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has something, so that's mine.
Yeah.
So are you team say sorry for net cords, or are you team no sorry for net cords?
I think the etiquette still remains that, yeah, if you hit the net, you can put up your hand and
No, Collin wants people to beg for forgiveness.
No, not at all.
You
You
heard
can
it
put
here.
up your hand. That's the etiquette. You're not sorry. I know you're not sorry, but you know it's a nice thing to do. So I'll continue to do it. If you choose not to do it, so be it. I'm sure that Zane will fist pump and say that's where we eat when he hits me off the net.
That's where we eat.
I've never said that before in my life.
No, well, now you can.
Well,
I
actually,
just
what I've
gave you the
started
idea.
doing is that's a good one. But what I've started doing is instead of apologizing, I just have been in practice. I've been doubling down. I will hit the net for a winner and then flip them off.
That'll get
So-
an even more severe response from me. So I can't wait for you to hit me off the net in the tournament. It might come to blows metaphorically.
Yeah, not physically. I don't
Not
think
phy-
either
not
of us are interested in getting into a fist
No,
fight.
I'm
There's no
not,
winners
so,
there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you can look for. You guys will know that this is all in jokes if you listen to the podcast. But next time I hit a net cord winner on Collin in a tournament, I will flip them off. You heard it here first. I will.
All right, I will think about what my response will be, but it will be
Oh,
something
man, now he
worth
has
having a
time.
video camera around for.
Okay, now he has time to
I hope
formulate
this
a
happens
response.
so we can.
Next tournament, PPA, draw, Zane, Collin, first round.
You know what? I am gonna have to say not on. You know what?
It's got to be on championship court.
I don't want to get fined, but also I don't know whether how big those fines are. So I guess we'll find out for science.
We can ask DJ.
We can't ask DJ. He said no, he couldn't talk about it.
Oh.
And also, he's never flipped anybody off. He almost murdered somebody with a paddle, but he's never flipped somebody off.
We could ask Pablo
We could ask Pablo.
or Tyson. Either one would work, but back in the day, I don't think there were fines, so Tyson wouldn't have gotten fined.
Fair.
I think
All right.
he got a text from Connor Pardo. Please don't do that.
Please stop. Cease and desist. Cease and desist flipping off your opponents.
Yeah, and Matt writes, like, as a lawyer, I don't think you need to do that. I don't mind it. I think this is great. Texas Open, lest we forget, 2021.
What a wild time
What a wild time to be alive.
on that one court that was red, white, and blue Texas flag.
Oh, you could not see anything under like the overhang and rock wall. That was one of the worst courts ever created.
Wait, what happened?
Well, it was the final gold medal match. Ben was playing with Matt, and Tyson was playing with Riley, and they were getting into it. It was a pretty hotly contested match, and Tyson, I forget why he flipped Matt off, but he flipped Matt off on the live stream, and yeah, it definitely went around. It can be
remember that
found.
one.
It can be found.
Yeah.
Texas Open, I think it was 2021.
Oh, did Matt deserve it?
He may have deserved it. I don't know, but
Isn't
when you're
it?
doing it on a live stream where it can be recorded, probably not the best thing to do.
There's something weird about in pickleball where that seems to be. I mean, we just named 4. It's like the go-to gesture. Imagine in basketball, LeBron was just like, it'd be like, what was that? It's so awkward. Yeah,
This is true. I can't think of any other time in sports when people have flipped each other off.
right. It's such an odd thing.
Yeah. I guess the proximity of pickleball makes it kind of unique, but then there's a net in the way. It's almost like there's an obstacle, so you're not going to go and like get in their face.
Right.
But
Right.
you're going to have some banter, and you may or may not flip them off.
This is true because you are kind of like, in any other sport, which are contact sports, you can just like give him an elbow or something.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So if you're in an MMA ring, yeah, you might get more than an elbow, but I feel like that little almost
The barrier.
the barrier, yeah, it might play a factor.
Okay. There we go. That's why
You heard it here
pickleball
first.
players flip people off.
Yeah.
Some tennis player at some point had to have flipped somebody off. Tennis players do wild stuff.
Oh, remember when Murat Safin, he got a bad line call, or he thought it was a bad line call, and then he went to the ref and he raised his middle finger. He's like, it was out by this much.
That
was one of the
perfect example.
A perfect example. So he didn't even get a technical warning for that. He didn't get a warning at all because the ref was just laughing. And it was Safin. So it's like, yeah.
So
he
charismatic.
just flipped me off, but he did in such a hilarious, charismatic way that I'm not going to penalize him for it.
That all we got?
I think so. It's only going downhill from here. We didn't have any Stop Alzheimer's Now questions. So guys, remember, you can ask whatever question. I will answer literally anything. If you make a donation to Stop Alzheimer's Now, stopalzheimersnow.com.
And I might sign up for that at the end of this.
Yeah, seriously, I will answer absolutely anything. You can throw in anonymous questions. Like, it doesn't have to have your name to it. I can't speak for Thomas, whether he's going to answer or not, but I'll answer anything.
Okay. I'm gonna consult with Althoff and get a really good question in there.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that'll be good. All right.
I take that back.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys.
All right, we had a great episode today. As you could probably see, I'm wearing my Vuori pants, as I always am. I wear them everywhere. Zane is wearing his Vuori shirt. So you can go to vuori.com/thedink, and you will get, I think it's 20% off purchases over $75. And Vuori is like the best brand for on-court, off-court, lounging, showing up to a party, you name it. And we wear it constantly, and we'd wear it even if they weren't a partner of ours. Vuori.com/thedink.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, darling, had to